we think the whole concept of zero trust is so critically important, which in a sense is, and this may be an exaggeration that I can say, Microsoft may disagree with this, which is never trust, always verify. You know, it's like the classic challenge and response. When I send lots of emails out, people want to say, is this a live person? Let me manually confirm this. But this is an incredibly important security paradigm that ties in with so many important issues such as endpoint protection. And again, this is what makes Marshana, Carmichael, and Mark so critically important. We're not hearing about a product that Microsoft is trying to sell you. This is what Microsoft does for, I don't know if it has 100,000 employees, 130, I forget the exact number, but learn about the way they use this incredibly important security solution, and then you can take away insights that can help your organization. All yours.
Thanks, Ron. That was actually a great introduction, and that's exactly how we talk about it. We do talk about that never trust, always verify. So you didn't go too far out on a limb on that one. Like you said, that's exactly how we think. And as Ron said, we're going to walk you through Microsoft's implementation. Now, one of the things you'll see if you've read a lot of the documentation that we've published out there, you may see some slight deviation from what we put out there. And that doesn't mean that those are the things that we're not in agreement on those internally. What it means is this is where we're at in our implementation today. And some of those things, they'll be coming in the future. Or some of those things we may have already completed. So if you see any discrepancy in what we have published versus what we talk about, that's the reason why. So I like to get that out up front. So let's just start with quick introductions. I am Mark Skarupa. My role in this is I am what we call the Zero Trust General Contractor. And what that essentially means is my role is to go work with all of the different people across Microsoft that have elements of the zero trust technical stack that they're actually doing the implementation work. We have a small team, and we kind of oversee the groups that are doing the actual work. We set the strategy, we set the goals, and we're going to talk about some of those things. And then we work back with these teams of people who actually go and they're the ones doing that implementation. And so my job is to understand what's going on across the entire company, as well as working back with our product team, and we'll talk about that a little bit as well. So I have we always joke about I am the Uber cat herder. I'm the person who has to go chase down all these different things and have that one view. Darshana?
Hi everyone, I'm Darshana Pandya. I'm the Senior Program Manager here with Microsoft Digital Security Risk Engineering team. And one of my primary responsibilities again here is doing the program management, end-to-end orchestration of the Zero Trust implementation inside Microsoft. So this project has been going on for a couple of years, but was not really coined under the term Zero Trust. So the team, I kind of oversee what are the work streams, if they are working per the plan and working on the strategy and the next item. So again, as Mark said, we have a small team out here which kind of oversees and does the strategy. So I'm kind of doing the program management for that.
And my name is Carmichael Patton. I'm our security architect on our Zero Trust core team to keep an eye on what we're doing around how we're protecting the assets and the individuals as they move out of our offices and onto the internet. My traditional role has always been around not protecting non-Windows systems, endpoint protections, so Linux, Android, iOS, and Macs.
And just something Darshana mentioned is we've been working on a lot of these different Zero Trust implementations for years now. We just haven't called them Zero Trust. And I think it's been maybe the last 18 to 24 months where we really said, hey, wait a second, all these things that we're doing for the right security posture really does roll up into this Zero Trust world. And so that's when we really started talking about Zero Trust as a program and as an initiative that we were investing in. Both Darshana and Carmichael, they've been around through a lot of that work. I'm fairly new. I started with the team at the beginning of the calendar year this year. So we like to tag team through these presentations. They have a historical perspective and that I just lack. I mean, obviously I've learned about it, but I didn't live it. So I like to have them tell the stories and kind of how we've done different things throughout the years. And then one of the things that I brought in was more of a let's get really specific about what we mean when we talk zero trust. We want to make sure that we all are chasing after the same things. We all have that same view of what zero trust is. And so here's this slide here we like to show, and it really kind of outlines the pillars that we think of when it comes to zero trust. And I think, you know, if you've done any research on zero trust, they should look pretty similar to what you'll see out there. But for us, we see there's these 4 core pillars that we talk about. We've got identity, which really is about your identity and is being validated. You have healthy identity. You are who you say you are. And we know that. You've got your devices, which back to say, we know that your devices are validated, they're managed, they're healthy, we can trust that device. You have your services, and services is an area we'll talk a little bit more about later, but this is really more about looking at your services, your resources, your connections. Everything is looking at all of your identity, looking at your device health, and making sure, yeah, these things all pass the check, so come on in. And then finally, we have access. Now, a lot of people refer to access as network, and you'll even see it sometimes in Microsoft, we do talk about it as network, but internally, we like to think of access over network because it's more encompassing. It's not just about network. Now, right now, a lot of our goals are focused on the network side of this, but it's really more encompassing than just network, so we like to use a more broad term. So those are our 4 core pillars. We have a 5th one we're going to talk about in a few minutes, but you'll notice that there's 2 other things that I didn't talk about, and that's the pervasive telemetry and least privilege access. Now, if you look around the perimeter, we view telemetry and least privilege access as integral components to each of these pillars. There's telemetry that is required for all of those 4 pillars. So they kind of circle the whole foundation and hold everything together. So they're interwoven into each of those different items. And like I said, there's a 5th pillar we're going to talk about, and I'll explain why we don't show it on this slide. It's a little bit different, but it's actually one of the most important pillars. Darshana Carmichael, anything else you'd like to add on this one?
No, I think you covered it all.
Yeah, Mark, I would just say, I think foundationally, one of the other things we always get asked when we share this is the data, and the data is what's behind that lock in the center of it, right? It's the thing that we're trying to protect. It's not just Microsoft's data, it's our customer data too. There's a lot of trust that you have upon us to make sure that we maintain and secure that data that you give us. So having that, all of these protections that we're going to talk about today in place in order to protect that data is really the foundational of what we're trying to do.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to build this slide out, and Carmichael, why don't you go ahead and walk through kind of this high-level view of how we view zero trust and the flow internally here.
Yeah. So again, what we're foundationally trying to do is remove the users from our corporate environment, but give them a secure and managed access to the different things that they're trying to get access to, whether that's directly to data, whether that's to the applications in the cloud, or even on-premise applications. So having the user verify who they are, connecting to the internet, getting access into the applications, requiring multi-factor authentication into those applications or services that they're trying to get to, limiting the access to only those who should have access to it through things like role-based access controls or other mechanisms, and then monitoring and managing that device, ensuring that the right policies are deployed to your device and that we're monitoring those for health status. So are they complying to those policies? And then we say healthy service, and it's grayed out. It's not one of the blue ones in that circle, and that's because we're looking at sort of the 3 pillars of user, applications, and devices. We're already getting health attestation on users and on devices, but what we don't do is have that application itself verify what it's doing. So ensuring that we could then have all 3 of those within that ecosystem, providing that health telemetry back so that we can make a decision as to what type of access a person should be granted to that application from that device.
Hey, real quick, Ron, just an administrative question for you. I do see questions popping up, and I don't know if those are questions that are holdovers from the last session or if those are new questions coming in. We like to be interactive. I know in this type of environment, sometimes it can be a little challenging, but if you want to jump in, if you do see questions on some of our slides, we're happy to stop and answer those questions real time, or we can wait to the end. It's really your call on how you'd like us to do this.
So Mark, I'm monitoring the Q&A and I don't see any in there for us right now.
Okay,
I think
great.
we can keep going.
Great. Okay, so as I mentioned, I've only been with the team for about 6 months now, and we've had a lot of work in progress. Microsoft's done a ton of different things towards what we're calling Zero Trust. But one of the things I wanted to do was really to pull the team together and say, hey, let's make sure that we've gotten real clear definition on what we're trying to accomplish here over the next year, 2 years, 3 years. And what we did is we sat and said, well, let's sit down and let's talk about some different scenarios. Let's start mapping out the scenarios we want to make sure are covered in when we're doing Zero Trust deployments and when we're implementing different pieces of Zero Trust. We wanted to make sure that we have these scenarios always in the back of our mind that kind of lead us down that path. Now, I think the team, we came up with somewhere around, I don't know, I think 30 or so scenarios, which obviously that's a lot of scenarios. It's good. We did due diligence, thought through these things. But what we really wanted to say, okay, now of those 30 scenarios, what are the top 5? What are those things that we absolutely have to make sure that we get right? The things that we're always thinking about. So, Darshana, why don't you go ahead and walk through some of these scenarios? Why don't you call out a couple of the ones that you think are the biggies that we should be talking through?
Yeah, as Mark explained, right? Like when you look at the core pillars of Zero Trust, which is the identity, device, access, and like if you look at how we have transitioned our scenarios, we are again talking about the same thing. Like when you are saying that we are going to validate the health of your device, we really want to make sure before we do that, we provide a capability for our employees to enroll their devices into a management system. So that's why, the first one calls out to be the scenario by itself. And here we use Intune for that purpose, where, be it a corporate provided device or a personal device, if you want to access corporate resource, you will have to enroll the device into Intune, and through that, we manage the policies and verify the health of the device. The second one is interesting because when we talk about device management, we come across this situation because we have a lot of non-FTEs who come and help us with a lot of our business functions. And then, and also we have our employees who wouldn't be willing to enroll their personal devices into the management system because, again, everybody have their own reservations. So we were like, how do we enable that set of population so that their productivity is not hampered and they're still able to access the resources? So the second one is more around providing that capability, which is Windows Virtual Desktop. So we're looking at virtualization for that solution. The third one, again, as Mark talked about, a lot of focus was around network. We have a big network, which is corporate network. We have a lot of things in place, and when attacks happen, that becomes the primary focus. So here, one of the goals we have as part of Zero Trust is segmenting the corporate network into individual networks so that we then can have those segmented networks based on the role and function. So one of the sessions which we'll have later today would be with Devang and Lindsay, who are going to talk about the work which we are doing in the facilities segment. So again, we are also moving our users or the day-to-day users from the corporate network to internet network, so that we are making all those functions available on internet in scenarios like this where you do not have to have that dependency on corporate. So all that work is actually going under scenario 3. Scenario 4 is the ultimate thing, right? So if you have device health enforcement, you have the identity enforcement, but until and unless the service which the user is trying to access doesn't enforce those requirements, all the work which you're doing around enforcing the identity and device health goes waste. So so there's, like, in Microsoft you have hundreds and thousands of applications. So each and every application and services will have to start talking the language of Zero Trust. So all that work goes under that category. And scenario 5, like when you talk about Zero Trust, everybody thinks, oh, Zero Trust is a security focused initiative. Well, not, because we are impacting every employee inside Microsoft. So we really want to focus on the user experience part of it. So scenario 5 is primarily focused on how can we make the user experience better by providing our employees the ability to find and discover and also launch their applications and services through a portal.
Hey, Darshana, we have a question here from Akbar Karimi. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Second scenario reminds me of Shadow IT. How can we keep track of the personal devices in terms of accessing corporate resources? And I think it's a great question because you have to make sort of a decision on what access to resources you want to provide to what types of devices. And for us, we made a full investment over a year ago into using conditional access through Azure Active Directory in order to enforce the connection of personal devices to resources. So Office 365 being our hero app. If you want to get Outlook on your device, if you want to use Teams on your device, you have to enroll that device and have it be managed in order to get access to those resources. Prior to that, we actually made another decision unilaterally to also remove Corp wireless access to all of those devices and only allow mobile devices, personal devices, to connect to our guest network. So if you want to use Wi-Fi, we're still allowing you to do that. You just have to use the same Wi-Fi that any normal person would be, using in our, say, like our lobby or our executive briefing center or someplace like that, on those types of devices. Now for Windows and for Macs, you still are forced to enroll your device into that. In getting enrolled on those client devices will then give you the certificates to get onto the wireless segments that we're going with. And we have some slides later on that will talk about our segmentation strategy and what we're doing to move from our flat network into more of a segmented network. So we can definitely cover that. But hopefully, Akbar, we actually answered the question you had there. If not, please feel free to ask us another one.
Okay, moving ahead. So once we had our scenarios defined, we said we need to put goals in place. We need to make sure that we're all working towards the same end goal. And so what we did is we said, we've got our pillars identified. We know our scenarios. We said, so let's start identifying what our high-level goals for each of these pillars look like. And so we spent a lot of time working through this, and I think we probably had multiple days of full days of brainstorming sessions of what is it that we want to do. And the idea behind creating these goals is to make sure as new things come up, as new scenarios come up, as new products come in, we always have something to go bounce it back off of. We get to come back and we look and say, well, somebody wants us to do something. How does that either align with our goal, or is that at odds with our goal? Or maybe we need to add a new goal because what they brought up was something that we missed, or was a gap, and so we can then integrate it in. And so we spend a lot of time, again, you'll see your 4 pillars we already talked about. You've got your identity, device, access, and service. And I mentioned earlier that there was a 5th pillar that wasn't part of that first slide, and that's the experience pillar. And we don't include that on the first slide because the first 4 really are more on those technical implementations. But the 5th slide's just as important, and that's all about making sure that you're delivering the right experience as you roll out different Zero Trust, whether it's features, whether it's products, whether it's changes to workflows, because a lot of those things will happen as you're rolling out your Zero Trust implementation. And so we want to make sure that as we're doing this, that we're bringing the employees along on the ride with us. I think we've all been in situations where security sometimes feels like security did this to me, and we want to avoid that. We want to be, hey, look, there's going to be times where you have 0-day patches that we have to push things out. Totally understand that, but we have an opportunity as part of the bigger program, as we're being more planful in what we're bringing out there, to actually say, let's tell the story to people. Let's actually show how we're enhancing their experience. We always look to say, is this going to be a step backwards in the experience or a step forward? And we always obviously try to look for that step forward. A great example of this is we've recently moved away from passwords. Our passwords don't expire, which at Microsoft is a huge, huge thing. We went from this every 3 months you have to change your password to every year to now they just don't expire. And we don't use our passwords that often. And again, I Windows hello. I walk up, I smile at my laptop, it opens for me, and away I go. And that's the experience for most of our employees. And that's a great example of how we've actually made things better for the employees, and it's also made us more secure. And then kind of going through some of these things, they should look very familiar. We talked about at the beginning the identity being verified. Yeah, that's one of our core goals. We do like to talk about the unmanaged devices. We talked a little about this a minute ago, but really what we've done there is we've actually said, from a BYOD perspective, we don't force our employees to enroll their personal device. It's a choice, but if they make the choice to not enroll their device, we feel like we have to provide them a method to get access to the resources they need. Think about the world we're in today. A lot of us are working from home because of the COVID situation. And so if somebody didn't have a corporate resource, all they have to access the information is their personal device. We've built a system through a virtualization system to allow them to use their personal unmanaged device to spin up a virtualized session that is a managed session, access those resources, and when they're done, they close down that session gets thrown off, put back into the resource pool, and away they go. So it was really important for us to say, because we don't provide people phones, we want to make sure that there's options for them to be able to get in and get the information they need. We talked a little bit about the network segmentation. That's it's actually, I think we have some slides on that a little bit later, but that was a big thing, is we had one big flat network. When we started, we had our corporate network. That was it. And so we've spent a lot of time breaking those out, building the micro segmentations to come up with what's the best way to segment out whether it's users or whether it's devices, finding those right segments to make sure that things are isolated and protected from each other, building walls between so you can't get that lateral movement. And then the last thing I'll talk about is the applications and services enforcing conditional access. Darshana mentioned it, I think, in the last slide with the snare. That's really important. You can go through and you can have a system to enroll your device, a system to manage your identity. But if the services or the applications you're trying to access, if they don't respect the health state of your device or your identity, it's all for naught. And so making sure we've got those things in place, and we used O365 as our hero app. We call it that because we felt like almost every employee is going to access O365. So if they want to access O365, they're going to have to meet those checks. So all of the hundreds of thousands of other applications that we have, chances are they come along for the ride. They're not doing that enforcement, but those hero apps that the people use every day are doing the enforcement. So we felt like that was a great first step to get the most broad coverage.
Hey Mark, we have a question from Christopher Crowell. What level of security is Microsoft offering to allow the limitation of data only to be accessed contiguous US? I'm assuming that's what it stands for, only. And just to quickly answer that, we do have, through our access policies and conditional access, we have a policy called location based, and so that could be set up to be based on IP ranges. So you could say you only allow them to access it from this particular office, from this particular country, from this particular IP segmentation that I have. It is one of the policies we use, for example, within our privileged access workstation workflow. So our administrative devices that are highly managed, allow list only types of devices have to come through a particular virtual private network. And that range is then added on to our policies to say only these devices from this network segmentation can access these sets of applications or resources. So it is possible through that location-based rule.
Great. Before we move on to the next slide, Carmichael, Darshana, any other of these goals that you feel we didn't touch on deep enough that you want to add to, or?
Just one thing I want to highlight here, as you see least privilege access and telemetry, right? And you see that spanning across all the pillars. And as Mark mentioned in the very first slide, right? Those become the foundational components where when we were doing this planning on, should it be a pillar by itself or, why is it vertical? We realized that telemetry and least privilege has a role to play in each and every pillar, and that's why you see that aligned. We have specific sub goals which we have not displayed here, however, which is focusing on what is least privilege access and telemetry going to do in each of the individual pillars which we are tracking.
Yeah, and just one more real quick question from Eugene Kogan. The question is it related only to E5 licenses? E3 licenses or Enterprise 3 licenses do include a lot of the capabilities. Some of them, they're just like basic out-of-box policies, but you can get it through that. Office 365, if you're using more of a small mid-business, does have some capabilities to do some of the same things we're talking about here. But to get the full, and of course, on an E5 license gives you the full suite of things like advanced Azure Active Directory capabilities and things like that. So there are different levels of this as you move through the different licensing models that we have.
Great. Now we're going to go through, have a quick history lesson of the evolution here. So I'm going to hand this over again to Carmichael and Darshana to kind of walk through where Microsoft started and where we're at today.
Carmichael, do you want to take a stab?
Yeah, so I've been at Microsoft for about 5 years now, and when I came in, we were already kind of doing a lot of the work that finally, fell underneath our umbrella of Zero Trust about 18 months ago. And, ultimately it was getting devices to start being managed, asking people to move away from Active Directory domain joining their Windows machines, or leaving our Macs and Linux and iOS and Android devices on the network unchecked, but then forcing certificate-based authentication to our segmentation so that they had to get managed in order to get the certificates. There wasn't an enforcement mechanism per se. They could still get access to resources that weren't within the corporate network, openly. So starting to enforce multi-factor authentication, moving away from single-factor, we're now, quite a ways down that path where all of our applications and resources require MFA to get access to them. Enforcing strong identities, so migrating our identities from our traditional on-prem Active Directory to Azure Active Directory, and a lot of that occurred as part of our Office 365 migration about 3 years ago when we completed that. And then we had a large effort around data classification and information protection, so getting those components integrated into our Office 365 deployments, ensuring that people were tagging documents correctly and that we had the right type of classification on those. So that we knew that when a document moved around our network, or more importantly, when it moved out of our network, that those documents as classified would force authentication into them, when then we could put conditional access rules on that. So one of the basic conditional access rules that we rolled out a couple of years ago was just enforcing, like, if you want to get to your Outlook email, you can do that. But in order to open up a document on SharePoint or OneDrive to do any editing, you had to enroll that device into management. So just those small things are what sort of had progressed us along the path. And you see the arrows there. They're not to say that you do identity, then you stop, and then you do device, and then you stop, and then you do access, and then you stop. There's this continuous ecosystem of changes that have to happen across all of those different streams in order to ensure that your components are established well. And we'll talk about some of the best practices that we learned as we went through this later on. Darshana, did you want to cover anything on this one specifically?
No, just one of the things here focusing on the user and access telemetry, right? Like for each of the phases when we started working on it, one of our major goals were like, do we know our environment well? Like when you want to enforce certain things, you need to understand. I'll take devices as an example. What devices are coming and accessing our resources? Like, and you need to understand the impact of the enforcement. So that's where you see the user and access telemetry being there across all the phases, because as and when we are planning about implementations and enforcements, we are actively looking at what's our telemetry and what's our environment looking like. So that we can use that data to derive at the decisions on how to least impact and make the least impact the users and make the best of what we are trying to do here. I think.
Okay, so moving on to kind of the progress. Talked a little bit about the history, and here's some areas where we're making progress. Again, Darshana, you can walk through this and talk about some of the things that we actually have in place today.
Right, and I actually feel Carmichael kind of covered a lot of the progress which we have done so far. So as we see, in terms of identity, we have 2FA enforced for all of our user accounts, and especially for O365 access, actually we have expanded it to all the applications. So when you try to access an application, at the minimum we require that you provide, we enforce 2FA. In terms of the devices, we have 100% of iOS, Android, and Mac devices under enforcement. What that means is, if you're coming from these devices and trying to access O365 resource, because that's our hero app, we will require that your device is compliant, it's managed and compliant by Microsoft. The other thing which we talked about in the previous slide is we're trying to reduce the dependency on corporate network, and all the traditional domain joined devices, as you know, would have some sort of dependency on corporate network for getting the policies or getting the patches and things like that. So what we are doing is we are relying a lot on the modern management of the devices. So our goal is we want all our client devices inside Microsoft to be modern managed, which would mean they be enrolled in Intune and be managed through Azure Active Directory. So there is one of the focus areas where all the net new devices which we are issuing for our employees, they are by default using AADJ and Intune. So we have this program called Autopilot, which we have now available for all the OEMs. The other thing, for unmanaged devices, we started this program, our service called virtualization, where we are leveraging Windows Virtual Desktop, and we are making that available. We are actually in process of enforcing WVD on all our non-FTE users. We actually have the pilots running now, so we are again looking at the data, understanding what the experience is, and trying to learn before we go ahead and enforce anything out there. So lot of work and progress happening on that front. Verify access, we have the segments created. We have the facilities segment, which is going to house all our IoT devices. We have the internet, I would say segment, which is a managed internet, which is being made available to all our employees. So once we will go back to our offices, we will have all our employees using the managed internet, because we want to give them the experience of not being dependent on CorpNet. And there's also a lot of work happening on looking at what are our traditional applications and services which are still CorpNet dependent, and how can we make them available on internet. So we're looking a lot at the VPN telemetry to understand those dependencies and work with the application owners to publish and migrate those applications on internet. The other thing around verify services, again, the thing which we are working on, which we have started to do is, as Mark explained, the concept of applications and services health being verified. So there's a lot of investigations and POCs which are happening on that front on to see how can we verify the health of the services before allowing any connections to that service. So a lot of progress happening here on this front. Mark Carmichael, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you covered them.
Exactly.
And doing a quick time check, we've got we're getting down there, so we'll in the interest of time, and hopefully we'll be able to have a little bit of time for questions at the end. One of the things that we like to talk about is internally we're in this unique position. We are probably the largest customer of our Microsoft, or we're definitely one of the largest customers of our own Microsoft products. We have we spend a lot of time with the different product teams when implementing our products, make sure that they're meeting our needs. Our Zero Trust implementation is helping shape where our products go. So if we start on the right-hand side of this slide, we've got a couple things. We meet regularly with our product teams. We open up either enhancement work items or bugs or anything in our product for that we need to help us get our implementation where we want it to be. And so we meet with them frequently, we triage those things, and everything that we ask the product team to do, it gets integrated into the product that our customers take. There is no internal Microsoft build of something. It's if we identify a gap in our feature set or an enhancement we can make, or even a bug, it gets integrated into that full retail product that goes out to our customers. So we are the first people who are out there implementing these things as part of Zero Trust and shaping where our products go as it relates to Zero Trust. We meet with our product marketing team to make sure we're telling our story. Meetings like this where we come out and we talk about, here's what we're doing internally for Zero Trust and how our products can help you get there. So we make sure that the product marketing team, they're hearing our message, they understand what we're doing, and they're putting information out there to help people, help customers, so they can take what we've done and they can learn from it and they can use it as part of their implementation. On the left-hand side, this is, we go through, so we've got the Zero Trust core team. That's Darshana, that's Carmichael, that's myself, and a few other people. And our full-time job is to make sure that we're thinking about Zero Trust, where we're going and how we're going to do it. At the beginning, I mentioned my role as the general contractor was to wrangle all of these workstream leads. we have 14 different teams that are out there doing different work related to zero trust. And so we work with those people very closely. We make sure, again, the goals that we talked about, the scenarios, that they're adopting those goals, they're adopting those scenarios as their own, that they understand how their work is impacting this larger zero trust implementation across the company. And so we work very closely with them. Then as you work up the stack, we work with their general managers, we work with their VPs. But the most important part in this slide is that top band, the Zero Trust Steering Committee. And what that is we meet monthly with a group of all of the leaders at Microsoft, the CVPs of the product teams, the CVPs of the marketing team. There's Zero Trust champions. Obviously within security, that we have a huge contingent of folks that are part of the Zero Trust, the ecosystem there. And we pull all of those people together and we talk about where we're at with Zero Trust, some of the challenges we're facing, and what the goal of that group is to make sure that we're always moving forward. And why this is so important is as you go down a path of implementing zero trust in your organization, you can't do it alone. Now, you may not have the product side, but you have to have the buy-in across the company. You've got to get these people who are going to champion what you're doing. Otherwise, you'll be pushing that rock up the hill and there's a lot of resistance. But if you get them to be part of your system, they understand why you're doing it, they're going to help you push that rock and that resistance goes way down. So I can't understate the importance enough of involving everybody at all levels of the company in that journey. It's an extension of the employee part of it, but you get the leadership involved as well, and they help you. They'll grease the skids to make the things that you're pushing out to your employees, they will be there championing it with you because they're invested along with it. Jumping ahead real quick, then we talk about those 14 work streams. Here they are. We have the pillars that we've talked about, and you'll see that we've got inside those pillars, you've got different work streams. There's a group of people at program manager who owns each of those different blue boxes inside there, and we work closely with them. What I do want to talk about though is the box more to the right. You've got the V next and beyond. We're always looking at where are we going with zero trust. It's great. We're working on today, but we always want to be thinking about tomorrow. Where's the industry going? What products are going? What new challenges have come up? And we want to make sure that we are always thinking, and we're running POCs, we're running pilots. How can we do things to make this a better implementation? And again, back to and have great user experience and all of that. So, but we are very deliberate in how we've set the program up to make sure that we're focusing on today, but always all thinking about tomorrow as well. We talked earlier about, and Darshan, I think, just mentioned the service health is verified. That's a future goal. That's something we're thinking about. That's something the VNext team is working on. But it's definitely kind of that next big thing that we think we're going to go jump in and go after. And then again, in the interest of time, the last thing we really like to talk about is there's a lot to this. I mean, we've gone through a lot of content in a short amount of time, but there's each and every one of those pillars or those work streams. There's a lot underneath each of those things, and it can be overwhelming. And so we like to we recognize that. We understand that it can be something that's a bit of a if you look at everything required, it's daunting. It can be a little bit intimidating. So we like to say, it's okay. We get it. Slow down a little bit. There's some things you can do to just get you moving forward. Darshana, you want to go ahead and walk through, or maybe call out a couple of the big ones on here that we've learned from our implementation?
Yeah, sure. One of the things which, and I'm not going to go in the order, one of the things which comes to my mind, like just being a PM, right? When you are trying to do an implementation which is going to impact at this scale, you really want to start small and learn from every small lesson, right? So whatever implementation we do, we start with pilots and then slowly gradually expand to rest of the organization, because every team is different inside Microsoft. Like the devices they use, they might be using it for a different kind of work, and we really need to make sure we have covered them all. The other thing is telemetry. Telemetry becomes super, super critical, because again, you have products, but when you're looking at implementation, you really need to understand your environment. And one of the tactics which we have been using, especially for the network segmentation work, is we are looking at the VPN traffic, where we are trying to leverage the situations which are like this, where majority of our employees are working from home. So we are trying to understand what are those VPN dependencies and work on the plan on migrating them. focus on user experience. And you know, because again, zero trust is not going to be a one-time thing and like, yeah, you roll out something and you're done. This is going to be an experience for future as well. So you really need to start thinking about the user experience. And again, communications, I think this is one of the areas where when you talk about zero trust, right, like people are like, okay, looks like, you know, my organization doesn't trust me anymore. So how do you make the users understand, you know, what is the true essence of zero trust and make them be part of that journey becomes super critical. So communications is one of the important things. And again, for any program, and especially the program which is this big, where you have 14 work streams which spans across various domains, how do you measure that you are going in the right direction? So you need to start assigning KPIs, and you evolve on those KPIs as you measure towards your journey.
Yeah, hey, we also got a question in here from Prashant Lande. In the zero trust model, what happens when biometrics fail or change for some reason? What's the next option for a real user to get authenticated if passwords are no longer used? And again, great question. The Windows Hello service on the Windows Hello for Business service that exists on the machine actually leverages a PIN-based authentication that you can create a role on what you want that PIN to look like. And so first with that PIN, that's how they would be able to get in. They would then be able to set up, depending on what their device supports, facial recognition, fingerprint, other biometrics. You could also use smart card authentication or even like a YubiKey or some other type of authenticator as well. And so there are different mechanisms for allowing you to access those devices without having a password. The fallback is always the password, and if they don't remember their password, they can go out and have it reset, and they can get access back into the device. Because you know, having not have to renew my password for the last year, so it's easy to forget what your password might have been. But we still have a lot of that's on the Windows devices. We still have a lot of need for passwords in other environments. We just haven't completely eliminated passwords yet. Definitely on the journey to get there, and hopefully there'll be good systems in place through authenticator apps and other things that allow you to do it as well without having to have a password there on the device itself. So